At this year's Chicago Marathon, Kelvin Kiptum took down the world record with one of the greatest performances in the history of the 26.2-mile distance. For the first half, he covered it in 1 hour and 48 minutes, followed by a remarkable second half of 59 minutes and 47 seconds. Looking at this split ratio from the first to second half, I can still barely believe it even happened. He is just without doubt the greatest closer in the history of the marathon. And speaking of Kelvin Kiptum's incredible close, here is his full mile splits from this year's Chicago race, where as you can see, he ran some of the greatest splits of all time over the second half. And reportedly, he had 2 splits during the second half that not just tied, but broke the fastest 1 mile split ever for this distance, running mile 19 in 4 minutes and 21 seconds, and he also ran mile 22 in 4 minutes and 18 seconds. This is insane speed, and at the time, this was reported as the single fastest mile in the history of the marathon. But unfortunately, more information has recently come out that puts this 4:18 as a very doubtful split. Now, at the time, this 4:18 was the single fastest mile split, but if you take a closer look at what was exactly happening over the second half, starting around mile 18, you get an idea that this 4:18 probably didn't happen. Now, for mile 19, he went 4:41 for mile 18, 4:21 for mile 19, followed by a 4:46 for mile 20. This by itself already is pretty troubling because this means he dropped 20 seconds to mile 19 and then went up 25 seconds to mile 20. Unless he decided to run a very quick short burst and then intentionally slow down, this probably didn't happen at the end of the day, and while mile 22 is a little bit more realistic, given that he ran a 4:24 just before and a 4:36 right after, it still is very much being put into question, and the reason this is so doubtful is because LetsRun did a little investigation along with the Chicago Marathon team, and they found that the mile mark splits for mile 19 and mile 22 were probably around 30 to 50 meters off from where they actually should have been. Now, when I first heard this, I was actually pretty scared about the fact that perhaps the full marathon distance was not measured correctly, but according to the Chicago staff, the full marathon distance was heavily scrutinized, meaning that they had to get that right. And it's also important to mention that this is the highest level of marathon road race in the world. This race is a World Athletics Platinum Label event, so they have to get the full distance right, and the course has been measured many times by certified course measurers. But when it comes to the individual mile splits, mile 19 and mile 22 are almost guaranteed to be wrong. This is somewhat of a bummer because it was really amazing to think that Kelvin Kiptum was going that crazy over the second half. And even though he didn't run individual mile splits of 4:21 and 4:18, he still ran around 4:30, if not slightly faster for these 2 splits, which, as far as I'm concerned, is equally as impressive because it shows he has good pacing over the second half. For a while, I thought if he ran a 4:18, why didn't he just pace it a little bit more conservatively, and he could have run a second half of, let's say, 59:30, which sounds absolutely crazy at face value, but if he was running those 2 mile splits that fast, perhaps he could have done it. Now, it's also important to mention that on the women's side, Safan Hassan did sort of experience a similar thing from mile 18 through mile 20, as she ran split times of 5:10, followed by a 4:57, and then a 5:28. Given the fact that both the men's and the women's races had a very quick split for mile 19 here, gives even more credence to the fact that this mile split was positioned just a little bit off. And they mentioned that there are a few reasons why the mile split mark could have been placed in the wrong spot. It could have had to do with an overpass where athletes run through. It could have been put on the wrong side of that. These things do happen from time to time from big marathon races, and the big priority is that they get the full marathon distance right. It's still very important to get the kilometer splits and the mile splits right, but unfortunately on this day, for mile 19 and mile 22, these splits are wrong. So at the moment, Kelvin Kiptum does not have the all-time fastest marathon split in marathon history. That title still goes to either Daniel Donashimiento from last year's New York City Marathon or Amos Kipruto from last year's London Marathon. But he clearly has the ability because he is the fastest marathoner ever, regardless of not getting split times correct. And I just wanted to give you guys an update on this because this was a very interesting read, and I'll make sure to put the full article in the description down below. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, until next time.